Well, I bid you good afternoon from Monday, the 31st. This is a new format I'm trying out. If you see this, it's been successful. If you don't see it, it wasn't successful. Going to try to do this via Zoom, share the screen, and have you be able to look at both the lecture and the lecture notes. Several of you have suggested that it would be very helpful to see the words and the concepts written out on the screen, so we're going to try it. Just some heads up about what's coming up this week. I need you to have finished chapter 1 by next Tuesday, a week from this Tuesday. On that Tuesday, I'll go over chapter 1, and then the next Thursday, not coming Thursday, but the next one, at our help sessions, lab sessions, whatever you want to call them, we will go over chapter 1 together. I've been able to come up with this new format with the help of IT at the college. And I think we finally ascertained how to best get it to you, although it still is experimental. So watch for this for the next day or so, and we'll hope that the link works. That's been the problem heretofore, is something went wrong with the link when we put this on WebAdvisor and sent it out on email. Somehow the link was broken and couldn't be opened. We think we've solved that problem, but we shall see. Because we are using this new format, I'm going to go back over some of the lecture that we've gone with so far. So I'm bringing up the lecture notes here that we started out with. Remember that we are beginning to look at the pre-Socratics, the very beginning of philosophy, and we dated them about the same time as the Hebrew prophets in the Bible. We talked about the key word for religion being faith, the key word for philosophy being analysis, and the key word for science being fact. But even in minute experiences and minute searching for the truth, we tend to go through these three ways that humans have always known in individual searches as well. All science begins with faith and hypothesis. We don't get that without feeling strongly that our idea will work, and that's how philosophy begins, which is simply nothing much more than religion's faith in its own concepts. We talked about the pre-Socratics being more physicists than anything else. Thales thought that water was the essential element of the world. Anaximenes thought that air was the essential element. Heraclitus talked about fire being the essential element, and Xenophanes talked about earth as being the essential element or the base of all things. They counted four. All of them acknowledged that water, air, fire, and earth were essential elements, but they disagreed over which was the most important. We now know that there are 118 as far as contemporary elements go. Those are the bedrocks of what make up material. So that should give you a hint that these early, what we call philosophers, were technically physicists. They were physiologoi, studiers of the physical. We even have a little bit later than the first pre-Socratics, right before the time of Socrates, we have Democritus and Lucretius, who were early atomists. They even invented the word atom, from which we get all of our atomic structure today. Parmenides is a pre-Socratic. He's one of the late pre-Socratics. He really is the first one to ask what we call ontological questions, problems of being, what is really real. And we heard that Hegel said that Parmenides began philosophy proper. So he was different than the other pre-Socratics, who, as we've said, were more like physicists. Parmenides states the problem of being, and he outlines what is known in today's terms as absolute being. That is versus conditional being, which is as if or if then. Now, Heraclitus said that was the only kind of knowledge that we have. Heraclitus, of course, was one of the earlier pre-Socratics. Parmenides and Heraclitus really established two problems that the pre-Socratics were not able to come to terms on. Plato was the first to synthesize the theories of both Parmenides and Heraclitus, and we'll talk about a little bit later. Parmenides was an old man when Socrates was young, and Parmenides was from the city-state of Elea, now the Italian city of Lucania. Zeno of Elea was his follower, one of the first theoretical mathematicians in history. Some of his problems have not been solved even today. We went over, remember, the dichotomy or the problem of the runner. That's not important. That's simply to tell you a little bit of the history of theoretical mathematics as it started by Zeno of Elea, who again believed that there was no such thing as change. For him, mathematics was simply the truth of any truth. So a concept was more important than the actual cause and effect of that concept, things causing other things. So those, for him, had to be illusory. So the pre-Socratics, the physiologoi, left us with 5 essential problems. Why is there something rather than nothing? The problem of the one and the many. Appearance versus reality. And we know from practical experience that things are not always as they seem. If 15 of us witness a wreck on the highway, then there are going to be at least 15 observations about what really happened. Then they understood, they're the first to understand the relationship of cause and effect, that there are causes for effects, and then more causes that spring from those causes, more effects that spring from those causes. Fifth and final thing is, what does it mean to know? Is truth personal or is it objective? Very simply, is there such a thing as truth, unchangeable truth? Now, after the pre-Socratics, Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle come on the scene. They are the first truly systematic, what we might call systematic philosophers. It's really Aristotle that lays down the format of the modern university, where we study philosophy and physics and literature and science, mathematics. He designed the structure of a college which you attend today. He laid down that structure and that format. The fields of philosophy established through the machinations, through the works of Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle are metaphysics, which is really, we said the last time, a misnomer. Metaphysics simply means the book after the physics, which is the place where Aristotle discussed ontology. Ontos is the Greek word for being. So ontology is the study of being. What does it mean to exist? Epistemology comes from the Greek episte, which means knowledge, and again, logia, tagged to that, the study of knowledge. Then there is logic. I'm going to correct this right now. I keep correcting this, and somehow it wants to reappear. Okay. Logic is kind of the queen of philosophy. Again, it comes from the Greek notion of logia, the study of the systematic structure of things. That was extremely important to the Greeks to know the basis, as you might ascertain from thinking about what the pre-Socratics are thinking about. They want to know the bedrock essence of something. That's an invention, a gift that we have from the Greeks. Greeks invented philosophy, and they invented science, and they invented applicable mathematics. The final real subject of philosophy here is one or two, depending on how you count it. What we call ethics is really moral theory. It's a question of what is the good. The term ethics that's been coined to name moral theory is derived from the Greek word ethikos, which is itself derived from the Greek word ethos, meaning custom or character. So it's either the fourth field of philosophy or half of the fourth field of philosophy, because the old philosophers typically talked about aesthetics and moral theory as being a like field. Aesthetics asks the question of what is beauty. Moral theory asks the question of what is the good. And that may make some sense to you in a few minutes when we start talking about Plato, because Plato's various answer to what is the supreme character of the universe is the main cause of everything in Plato is either the good or the beautiful. His work simply can't decide. There's different theories about whether it's the good or the beautiful, that is the basic bedrock character of everything. So we'll talk about that when we talk about Plato. So this field of philosophy concerns judgment, hence the name axiology, axios, judgment, logia, our good friend, study of. So sometimes you'll find me talking about axiology, meaning questions of judgment. What judgments are right? What judgments are true? What judgments are scientific? And when we do that, we speak both, or can speak both, about moral theory and aesthetics, art. The final things that make up what we do in philosophy are application fields of philosophy, like philosophy of mind, a philosophy of science, the philosophy of mathematics, that sort of thing. Now, Parmenides was the first philosopher literally of ontology. Protagoras is one of those characters like Parmenides that was alive at the time of Socrates, at least. As a matter of fact, he might have even made it to when Plato was around. But he was an old man like Parmenides when Socrates was a young thinker. Protagoras is the first ethicist, the first moral theory person. The rest of the pre-Socratics, as we've seen, were not very interested in what we would call moral theory today. They were more interested in physics. The most famous statement of Protagoras is, "Man is the measure of all things." things that are and things that are not. So while he was, what we're going to find out in a little bit, a relativist, he was also an idealist. And I'll talk about idealism and realism in a few minutes. He has an early form of idealism, and that is that it's the human character, human endeavor itself that establishes truth. We don't discover truth. We, at worst, stumble upon truth. At best, we make the truth. So man is the measure of all things, of things that are and of things that are not. We are the characters in the universe that say what something is, because we have the use of speech, we have the use of thought, that hopefully speech comes from thought. So we create reality. Reality doesn't exist without the intervention of the human being. Reality is something that's not contained in the thing itself. There is literally no thing itself. There's simply the thought and the expression of that thing. And for most idealists, truth resides in the mental. For Protagoras, it would be as simply in human interaction. Plato's an idealist too, but for him, reality resides someplace else. And our souls are the things that tie us to that higher realm. So all of these people are idealists simply because truth doesn't reside in the world, it resides in thought, or with Plato, some place out there. So pre-Socratics were mostly physicists, and physics has a relationship to philosophy that goes back to this era of the pre-Socratics. Until the late 19th century, physicists were called natural philosophers. Sir Isaac Newton would not have referred to himself as a physicist. He would have referred to himself as a natural philosopher. And even at Oxford University in England to this day, in Heidelberg in Germany, a degree in physics is still called a degree in natural philosophy. So, to recap, Parmenides and Protagoras are the first to be identified with philosophy proper. Protagoras is first with a theory of ethics. The rest of these people didn't seem to be concerned with the right and the good or what actions were proper. Now, let me amend that here. I didn't even think about this when I was preparing this, but Galen and Hippocrates, the first physicians, they're called pre-Socratics too. They were part of this group of pre-Socratics. They, of course, were concerned about their clients, their patients. So they had theories of moral and health actions that they recommended. So I guess we could say that early medical doctors were, in the Greek sense, ethicists as well. But Protagoras is the first to write simply about the theory of ethics. That's his principal interest. And that's going to become one of the principal interests of Socrates and Plato especially, and certainly in most regards, we might say Aristotle as well. Now, as we've hinted at above, Protagoras was the first to form a theory of relativism, and he invented the sophist school of Athens. The sophists became the major interlocutors, the major enemies of Plato and Aristotle, Socrates too. And Protagoras is generally regarded as the first of these professional sophists. So I guess we might say he was the first professor of philosophy. Sophism, sophists come from the Greek word soph, which is one of their words for wisdom or cleverness, maybe. I'm not so sure it's wisdom. By the way, if you are a sophomore, it's a derogatory term. It means someone who thinks that he knows something, but she doesn't really know anything. So if you're a sophomore, that linguistically, at least that word is a joke. We used to say that as a freshman, you came in scared to death and didn't know anything. By the time you finished your second year, you thought you knew everything. So that's kind of the origin of the word sophomore. So soph means a kind of wisdom, a wisdom kind of like cleverness. We might even say street smarts, although it's maybe a little bit more than that. So sophists are soph plus estes, which means a proponent of, or an expert. So these people profess to be experts about how to make friends and influence people. And for a lot of money, they would teach you how to do that. Sophists we know of historically, in addition to Protagoras, include Gorgias, Prodicus, Hippias, Thrasymachus, Callicles, Antiphon, Cratylus. And ironically enough, Plato has dialogues named for many of these people. So he's really going on the attack against all of them. Many of these people are characters in either the dialogue is named for them. The dialogue is what Plato writes, the way he does his philosophy. So they're either a dialogue is named after them, or they're characters. Inside many of his dialogues, you see them as late as his middle period, where he's writing maybe the greatest work of all history, the Republic. It's too simplistic, but most of these persons taught, taught, I hate spell checkers, taught that the right and the good was established by rhetoric alone. I don't know if you know what rhetoric is. Rhetoric is normally taught in language departments. You know, there in the language department, you learn not only grammar, but you learn also the art of expression. So rhetoric is simply the art of expressing yourself well. That's what these people taught. They taught that right and goodness, that beauty and goodness was established by rhetoric, by convincing people alone, by persuasion and clever arguments. So for these early sophists, truth was relative, and that could be manipulated by eloquent speech, which again, as I say, for exorbitant prices, they promise to teach you how to do. Attorneys, not attorneys, attorneys and politicians, our concept of those come from this tradition. If you have a speeding ticket, you want your attorney to win your case, no matter whether you are guilty or innocent. So they don't typically care whether you're guilty or innocent or not. Their job is to defend you. This whole idea was invented by Greek sophists. Now, the reason politicians promise big when campaigning but don't deliver if elected is they were taught very well by the sophists. The most famous fragment of Protagoras, and again, like I've said before, remember, we don't have books from these guys because their writings simply have not survived. They're so old. But Protagoras is, we said above, man is the measure of all things, things that are what they are and things that are not what they are not. Sometimes it's just shortened as man is the measure of all things, the things that are and the things that are not. So this origin of relativism, it's the oldest moral theory, but it's also the least tenable. Socrates points this out very early in the dialogue, the Cratylus, which again is one of those dialogues named for one of these people. He points out to Cratylus that his idea that the truth is relative is either untrue or self-contradictory. He says, if all things are relative, if that is true, then it is an absolute statement and thus self-contradictory. So if something is true, it must be true and not just in name only. Plato completely rejects this relativistic claim. He forever refutes this. As a matter of fact, if there's one, it's kind of odd because this is the moral theory most accepted by common people. And yet it is philosophically and scientifically self-contradictory. And yet people seem to hold on to this. And I can't tell you why. I don't know. If you look at the thinking about this, it's simply impossible. So Plato rejected this claim. Many things are still argued by philosophy and science, but relativism is forever logically refuted by Plato's work. And I know very few philosophers today who give it any credence. And it's kind of odd. They seem to want to give it some credence, but they also understand that it is logically corrupt. It's logically impossible. The best argument I know for relativism is given by people like the English philosopher Hare. Straw is another. They claim that relativism is not intended to be a philosophical position because obviously it's untrue. They claim that it is a hermeneutic, what we call a hermeneutic. It's a skeptical methodology to keep us honest about truth. That's the best argument that I can come up with. I mean, they say, look, we know it doesn't work. But if we apply it, use it carefully, then it keeps you from being, it makes you humble. It keeps the thinker humble. Well, that's not such a bad argument, I don't guess. But people want to give it much more credit than it's due. So be careful about that. That's one thing. I assure you, if we were together and I took a poll in our class, I would say 9/10 of you probably believe that relativism is true. It's not. It's one of the stupidest positions in history. All right. We're moving on now to the end of our little section together about what philosophy is. So there are two basic positions in philosophy according to the question of the status of being. What does it mean to be? How do we know that something is, is? So Parmenides and Plato were idealists. Reality is not material. It's not the thing. It's not the thing in itself. Material is, for Plato, materiality, the thing, the object, is less real than the form, what he calls the form. F-O-R-M. Now in Greek, that word is ide. It's spelled the way we spell our word idea, I-D-E-A. As a matter of fact, we get our English word from the Greek word ide, which doesn't mean idea, but it means the solid structure of something, the real structure of something in Greek. So we get our word idea from that, but we kind of think of ideas as specious. You know, they're out there, they're not real, or they're less real, that you can't manipulate them. But for Plato, what he calls the form is the really real. Now there's a quarrel between the teacher and his student here. His student Aristotle rejected this position. He established the alternative metaphysics theory of reality, that of realism. For Aristotle, the form of a thing is embedded in its material. The thing is real. In Aristotle's case, the idea, the formative part of something is in the object itself, and our mind attaches to that. Those minds are natural occurrences, just like things, and so they're sort of made, fitted for each other, like blocks fitting together. The best way I know to describe what Aristotle understands by form is, if I see you coming across the parking lot, I can't tell yet what race you are, what sex you are. I only see an obvious person coming across the parking lot. That's your form. All of the other things that surround that, your race and your sex and all of the other things that might accrue to your definition, are simply what he called accidents of that form. They're accidents of birth, natural selection, all of those things. The essence of a person is the form of the person. And it's that form that makes you essential. It's that form which gives you your dignity. Your dignity doesn't correspond with your sex or your race. It's simply that perception of your immediacy and the truth of you and what you are and the importance of you is contained there, not in these accidents. So that's Aristotle's, I would say, naive realism. The form of a thing is embedded in its material. It makes it who it essentially is. And the mind is simply part of nature. And so the mind is made to latch on to that. So the thing is real for Aristotle. In Aristotle's case, the idea of a thing is part of the thing and not separate from it. So those are two theories about what is. And how do we know that? So that brings up epistemology. How do we know that something is true? What's the characteristic of knowledge? There are two answers to that, two essential answers: rationalism and empiricism. So we've got two answers to ontology, two answers to rationalism and empiricism. How do we know? And we know something's true. Well, rationalism argues that we know things through ideas that are born with, that we're born with those ideas. They describe them as innate ideas. They come to us in the whole apparatus of mind and psychology that we all inherit by our genetic structure. So we're born with those ideas. Empiricism argues that we come to know things only through experience. John Locke, one of the great English empiricist said that when we're born, we are a tabula rasa, use the Latin term, tabula rasa, which means we're simply a blank slate, and experience writes on that blank slate. So we come to know things only through experience. Early empiricists held a kind of a one-to-one correspondence theory between our experience and things, a kind of a common sense approach. So early empiricists kind of took this over from Aristotle. They wouldn't explain it in Aristotelian terms, but they inherited this idea from Aristotle. They call it common sense. As a matter of fact, there's a Scottish school of philosophy named Common Sense School of Philosophy. But later empiricists like David Hume became skeptical of even this claim, and at some points, Hume is arguing that we couldn't know anything at all. We had no knowledge. When we get to Immanuel Kant, we're going to discuss David Hume in particular points. But remember Heraclitus, who said that the essence of all things was fire, couldn't step into the same stream twice, that everything was flux. Well, David Hume is 2,000 year later edition of Heraclitus. So all old things are new and all new things are old. All right, let's take a moment and look at Plato here. Now we're going to spend a lot of time at the end of this course on Plato and Aristotle, because even though they disagree about what reality is, they have a healthy agreement about moral theory. So Plato's divided line, this is in the ascending order of reality. In other words, from the bottom here, we have things that are less real. So we begin with what he calls icons, what we might call images. We could even say photographs. So that's kind of the bottom line of what is real, pictures in 1 or 2 dimensions. Mathematics in 1 or 2 dimensions, geometry, descriptive of iconography. A step up from that is simply our perception. Whether that's right or wrong, perception has more reality than a picture of it. So visible things that we can see, my computer screen, the plant in my office. So visible perceptions, things that we see and perceive. So that's a little bit higher up on the level of truth. Then mathematics. Mathematics is kind of the truth of the mental picture of things. And we know this from science, do we not? That there's always, with every theory, there's a blessed correspondence between that theory and its mathematics. That's just something that is serendipity. That's just something that's a gift. And we don't, mathematicians, no one seems to understand that. Why is mathematics always descriptive of the reality that we discover? Well, for Plato's got a great answer to that, simply because mathematics is on a higher scale. It is approaching that perfect realm. It's closer to that ultimate reality, which is the form, the ide. There's a brilliant dialogue by Plato in which this is fascinating stuff, I think. In the Meno, Socrates is trying to explain this, and so he gets this little boy, pulls him aside. The little boy's gone out to draw water for the day at the community well. So he said, hey, kid, come over here. So the little child goes over there. He's 6 years old. He's never been to school. And Socrates takes him through this very complex geometry problem. And the kid can anticipate moves. Now, this kid doesn't know anything. He's never been to school. And yet he follows. He can understand this very complex problem in geometry. And if you've got a great mathematics teacher, they can take you through a similar problem. And I guarantee you that if they take their time with you, as Socrates obviously took his time with the little Meno, the little boy, then you can get it too. Why can people who don't know mathematics come to grasp mathematics, this higher level of knowledge? Well, Plato's simple answer is from the realm of forms. And how do we get it? That seems like stranger than this magical knowledge we might have about mathematics. But no, Plato answers, this kid's soul recollects it came from this perfect realm. It gets enmeshed in the material, and the truth gets sort of wiped away from it because of its connection with material thing. But in the back of its little soul brain, it still recalls this realm of the form. And that's how the little 6-year-old kid can follow this complex argument in mathematics and geometry. Interesting claim, isn't it? So the soul is the connection between this non-mental, non-physical realm of the form and the material world that we live in. So once we've established the realm of the forms as being where knowledge comes from, then Plato turns around and tries to describe what's the basis of this ethereal realm of perfection. What's the most perfect thing in the perfect? And he really can't decide. All the way through the dialogues, he's changing his mind. That's one of the great things about Plato, is he doesn't get locked into one way of looking at something. He's plastic. He can change if he figures out something better. So sometimes he describes it as the good. Early on, it's the beautiful. Middle dialogues, it becomes the good. So it's either the good or the beautiful. We know that much, he says. We don't know which is the most perfect, but we know it's one or the other. It's either good or it's beauty. So that is where Plato turns to try to describe what we ought to do. We ought to try to understand the good. That, I think, is about as far as we can get today. I do want you to understand this if you can. I know that it's not your typical way of thinking, but this kind of lays out for you the major approaches to the question of what is moral theory. How are we going to answer that question philosophically and not from the confines of our culture? Because we want to look for some truer realm than just opinion. Plato argues that we should never base the truth upon personal opinion. Now, there are moral theories that are going to do that. When we study egoism and consequentialism, sometimes called utilitarianism, that is one of the principal sources of the truth, is in majority think. That presents some problems in its own, Because what if the majority decides that they want to enslave the minority? We've run across that before, haven't we? Plato says, no. If you simply base it on statistics and opinion, then you're in a very weak position if you're not 51%. So there are problems that we can imagine and that we experience today because we've made decisions using that rule or that philosophy or that moral theory. So here's what's going to happen. This is going to come to you, hopefully. If it doesn't, I have really wasted my time. This is going to come to you, hopefully, as a link, which is going to take you to my Zoom cloud. Watch this, go over it. As I told you at the beginning, we did a slight review of where we've gone, so you'll know, if you haven't been able to come to any of our sessions, you will know the salient points of those sessions. And then on Wednesday and Thursday, hopefully it's going to be Wednesday morning, early Thursday afternoon, we'll open up another help session. If you can make it to that, that would be great. If this works out well, I even might try recording that session. So if you can't actually get into the session itself, at least you can listen to the recording. So I hope this helps. I hope it answers some of the questions that you've had, some of the concerns that you've had. And again, please read chapter 1 by next, not tomorrow, but next Tuesday. All right. Thank you so much. And please be safe. And I hope that you will return to our help sessions this week. Thank you so much. And again, goodbye.